This is usually a good choke to start with, the cross lapel choke. And the reason why it's good to start with is we assume that before people have done much training, they're finding themselves on the bottom. They're not able to establish a top position. And if you're on the bottom and you've learned to hold the person in your guard, then this is an easy choke to do. The most fundamental way to start to do it is to make a track. So instead of just diving this hand in, what we're going to do, we need to get the 4 fingers of one of our hands right around the back of his collar in the middle, not a shallow grip, but deep. So to do that, by pulling that, we can put our hand in anywhere down here and just zip it up there. Rather than going up here, we're just giving him a chance to drop his chin down and start to defend. Pulling this collar, you can zip it around the corner there and get it right in there. Then the other hand comes underneath the first hand. Same thing, 4 fingers inside, thumb outside, and that hand goes in almost to the point where you can just about touch your thumbs together. So my hands are as close as I can get them together. At that point there, we take good grips and we turn our thumbs in. So the thumb edges of each hand are pressing in the side of his neck to minimize the amount of surface contact with his neck. If the back of my hand's on his neck, it's not going to stem the blood flow to the brain as efficiently. So we want to make that a nice narrow surface area. So one hand in, second hand in, edges in, and now chest out, spread my elbows apart and pull his head down to my chest. Yeah, and when David taps, obviously I release, and he'll talk a little bit more about the whole tapping ethic in a minute. So make a track, zip it home. Second hand goes in, home, edges in, and pull him down. One of the most common mistakes with this is the first hand goes in and we pull so hard that the second hand can't get good penetration. So an easy fix for that is, one, don't pull hard. But an easy fix for that is, once I've got the first hand in, when the second hand's about to go in, actually push this away. Make a lot of space. Then it's easy to get the second hand in. So I'll get the first hand, I might be pulling hard now, second hand gets ready, first hand pushes away to make the space, second hand goes in, retighten it up, and make my finish. And the action is chest out, shoulders back, and spread my elbows apart until he taps.
So we've chosen this choke to be our first, in this lesson, to be our first finish in this whole series, in this curriculum, for a couple reasons. Number one is chokes are a great way to end a fight, and they're really an equalizer. You can, whereas arm bars or other kind of joint manipulations are also very powerful, it require a certain amount of strength. And if someone is very, very powerful, they can resist it a little bit better. Choke, the variation between someone with a strong neck or a weak neck, there's not that much variation. So if you really understand how to work a choke, a smaller person can basically shut off a bigger person, and without injuring them. Okay? So an important thing, though, is to know when to tap, is to know when to let go. Obviously, if you're cutting off blood supply to the head, which means you're really cutting off oxygen to the brain, if you were to hold that for minutes, you absolutely could kill somebody. Okay? So it's very important that when the person taps, which is the traditional way of signifying that the person wants to give up, not tapping on the mat, because he may not feel that, he may not hear it, but tapping on him. It's always a great idea to say something too, like, okay, if you can, anything to communicate to him that I want to stop. The moment he feels that, he lets go. Or, in the worst case scenario, if he feels me getting weak, thinking maybe my hand is caught, I can't tap, if he feels that my fight is gone, he'll stop immediately. So it's very important that I not have a problem tapping. Maybe, John, you want to talk about this too, because if you're going to train for years, injury is the enemy, and the way to avoid injury is to tap frequently and very willingly. Everybody taps. Everybody has to give up during the training. Any champion has tapped many times. You can't think of your normal training with your partners when you're sparring with them as some sort of a competition. You've got to be willing to tap.
Yeah. And even at a higher level, there's sometimes at a good level, if everyone's on the same page in the class, you can go by the no tapping rule. And the no tapping rule is almost that if David and I are wrestling and he gets me in an arm lock, I don't need to wait until my arm is fully extended to stop fighting. Because then he's going to, if I'm still fighting at this point, he's feeling a need to keep applying force. And then we get to the point where by the time I'm tapping, it's already too late or I'm being injured during the tap itself. So the no tap rule is kind of like, I know at that point he's got my arm, so I go, you've got it. I just stop fighting. He says, oh, you've stopped fighting, therefore I'll stop fighting. So there's almost a no need to tap at a higher level if you're communicating. So it's not really the tap that's important, but it's this communication that we have is, I've done the job, okay, you've got me. Just like in chess, you don't have to knock the king over to know that you've won the match. You know, the checkmate happens, in theory, one move before the end of the game. So it's really about communicating with your partner effectively. And when people are starting out, obviously they haven't got kind of any kind of relationship going or training relationship going. So the easiest way is to make that tap physical and really clear.
So that's some general thought about tapping, since this is the first time we've showed a finish. We should also maybe just take a minute to talk about the concept of a choke itself, since this is the first choke. The basic physics of a choke is you're shutting off blood supply in and hopefully out of the head, which means that the brain isn't getting any oxygen. And John, maybe you want to talk about the physics of the best way to do that.
Well, no oxygen getting into the brain three ways. We don't want any oxygenated blood coming in through the carotid artery, so no oxygen's getting in. We don't want any deoxygenated blood being drained from the brain via the jugular. So if none of that deoxygenated blood can come out of the brain, then there's no room for new oxygen to get in there. Plus, we want to, in theory, shut down the mechanism of getting oxygen into the body in the first place, meaning shutting down the larynx so that we got no carotid artery feeding oxygenated blood to the brain, no jugular vein draining blood from the brain, and no oxygen getting into the body. So we say, you know, three, one with a lot. I want the whole neck encircled. For a perfect choke, it would be belt around the neck, tighten it up so there's nothing going on there, anywhere right around the neck, and that's the ideal of the perfect choke. You can expect 8 or 10 seconds of that without a tap, that my partner just lapses into a state of unconsciousness. Then when I release the choke, the blood starts flowing again, oxygen is redelivered, and they come to.
So in every choke that we show, and in every choke you would see anywhere, it's important to remember the principle of completely encircling the neck and removing the slack. In the case of this cross choke that John did, he removed the slack by opening the track, setting in the first hand really deep so there was no slack, punching it, getting in the second hand so there was no slack, and then puffing out the chest. My neck was fitting into a spot that small. That's why I'm tapping out. So whatever choke you're doing, including a triangle choke, you have to take a look at it and say, how can I remove all the slack so that before I even begin my final push, there is no slack and everything's going to go into his head. Otherwise, if you start to pull hard for the choke and you're just removing inches of slack, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.